Hi, this is Vicky from the Spellbound Bead Company, and in this video I'm going to show you how to make the beautiful rainbow band bracelet designed by Ellen. So to make the rainbow band you're going to need 9 colours of size 11 Delica beads. These are all listed on the download with the colours. You're going to need some Nymo. I'm using white Nymo, a size 10 beading needle and a pair of scissors. So you'll also be able to download the colour graph from the website to show you how the stripes are laid out. So to get started, I'm going to start with about 1.5 meters of thread, a comfortable length thread to work with, and I'm going to thread my needle. Okay, on the end of the thread I'm going to tie a keeper bead, which is just a contrasting bead to stop that first row of beads coming off the end of the thread. So I'm just using this is just a size 8 seed bead. That's a nice contrasting size and colour. So just going to tie that in a simple overhand knot. Whoops. A simple overhand knot, she says. There we go. And that will stop the beads coming off at the start. So for those of you who aren't used to reading a peyote grid, just a quick run through of how this works. So when you make your first row of beads, you're going to start by threading on the equivalent of 2 rows. So in this case, it'll be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16 beads. So we'll do that, and then you turn the needle and you come back and you add every other bead on the next row. So that'll be 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23 and 24. Okay, and then you turn and work back. This is even count peyote, so you literally just work back and forth in the row. You don't have to worry about doing any turns or anything like that. So I'm just going to move the grid so that I can get to my beads, and we're going to start with one of the darker green, then 2 blue, 2 purple, 2 lilac, 2 red, oops, 2 red orange, 2 orange, 2 yellow, and then 1 of the paler green there. So that's my first 16 beads threaded onto the needle. So we'll slide those all the way down. Now this first couple of rows of peyote stitch are quite tricky because you haven't got a lot to hold on to. So again, bringing in the grid, the next row of beads that we're going to put on is this one. So yellow, orange, red, lilac, purple, blue and the darker green. Okay, so start with the yellow. So we're going to sit it above the bead on the end of the row, and we're going to go through the 15th bead added. Now you will need to make sure when you start row number 4 that these beads aren't twisted, because otherwise the first row of stripes is going to look a bit wonky. So just make sure that you've got those beads the right way round on the end. Okay, so then we're going to go for an orange and through there. Oops. And then that's another orange. Just make sure, because some of these colours are quite close, just try and make sure that you you don't get your beads into a jumble on the mat. So through the red orange next, and through, and then a red. Once you get into the rhythm of this pattern, you should find that you'll be able to see which bead you need to be picking up quite easily, because when you're working an odd numbered row, which is the row I'm working here, which is row number 3, you're going to pick up a bead that matches the one that you're going into, and when you work an even numbered row, which will be what the next row is, you're going to be putting on a bead to match the colour of the one you're coming out of. Okay, so we've got a blue here, and then a darker green on the end there. Oops, try not to catch yourself in the finger. Okay, so there we have the first 3 rows of our band started there. So we're going to come back across. So this is where we're going to bring in one of the bright green, the paler greens from the far end. And this is where we need to make sure we're going in. There we go. I've turned the work over. So I'm going into that darker green. Just make sure, if you can keep your work pinched between your fingers, it'll just help keep your tension nice and even. So there we go. So that's coming out of a green, picking up a green. So pick up a blue, into the purple, pick up a purple, and into a lilac, and then lilac to red, red into orange, orange, sorry, red orange into orange, orange into the end. Okay, now your yellow and your green are very close at the end here, so just make sure that you've got those the right way round to come back. So for the next row, start with the orange, and then the red orange, okay, so then the red, and then the lilac, and the purple, and the blue, and the green, and then the pale green. Oops, just pull that through, make sure it's sitting properly. Okay, so that's the first 5 rows done. So what we're going to do is we're going to continue to work all the way up the length of the grid until eventually you end up with the length of the band that you're wanting. So you need to bear in mind, depending on what sort of clasp you're going to put on, you need to take this length into account. If you're going to use a sliding clasp, so something like this one that you're going to stitch onto the ends, then you need to make sure that you only take up that length into the overall length of your band. If you're going to use something like a button on the top, then your band will need to be slightly longer to accommodate that, and then we'll put a loop on the end. Or the other option would be to do a bead and loop fastener. So I'll just work up the rest of the band and then we'll go through the options. Okay, so I've got the band to the length that I want it to be finished, and I've finished off the ends of the thread. When you're adding a clasp, I like to use a new piece of thread, because that way if anything happens to the clasp, if it gets broken or you find that you're struggling with it, if you need to take it off, you're only going to be cutting into the thread that you've added the clasp with. You're not going to be cutting into the body of the bracelet. So that will help that retain just that little bit of integrity. So the different options, as I said, if you want to use something like a button loop on the top, then what you'd need to do is just work through, and then you can just stab stitch that button into place. So you've got your bead there, you'd come up through your work from the bottom, through here, then just put on a delicate or a little picot delicas on the top, and then go back down through the bead and into the body of the bracelet. Come up and down a couple of times through to make sure that's nice and secure. And then on this end of the bracelet, you just make a loop of beads that would fit over the top of that that crystal there. This is a 6x8 crystal rondelle that I've got there, so you can obviously choose whichever colour you takes your fancy. I just quite like the red. So then that would sit round, and you could have it so that it sits essentially end to end. Now, if you're lucky enough to have a wrist that's the same length as a complete pattern repeat, then you could actually have it so that it meets, put your bead on, and then you've just got a little loop that sits across the top here. The other option would be to use a bead and loop fastening. So this will sit over at the end of the bracelet. You can either do it so that it's got two on, as it's a relatively wide bracelet, or just put the one in the middle. And again, you can come through work through the edge of your beads, come up, either use one or two facets on the end, come through, make a peak on the end, turn, come back through, and then you'd add a loop of beads on this other end again in the same sort of fashion as before. Or personally, I quite like the look of the sliding clasp, because they're a bit wider. They help stabilise the end of the bracelet, so they stop it folding over. So I've got a 3-row one there, or I've got a 5-row one. Now I think the 5-row one is slightly too wide because it's wider than the width of the bangle. If I was going if I was going to add a picot edge to this, which is an option that you can do, then I'd consider using the wider one. But as it is, I'm going to use the smaller one. So I've got my needle and thread. I've put a keeper bead onto the end again, and I'm just going to come through the edge of the work, come through from the edge of the work, so that we're sitting. So we're going to come out, we'll attach the ring in the middle first. So we need to come out halfway through. So that's 2, 4, 6. Oops, shuffling everything else around. Move those out the way. 6, 8. So, and again, you've got two options. You can either attach it with a loop of beads to the edge of your bracelet, or you can do what I'm going to do, which is butt it up to the edge so that it's relatively hidden. So I'm working just away from the edge of the bracelet, So I'm 1, 2, 3 rows in. So I'm coming out of the work. I'm going to go through that middle clasp, and then I'm going to go back down and in, like so. And then what I'm going to do is just over so come up through the bead and the ring there, and through the bead and the ring. Just do this a couple of times, a couple of angles, come through and make sure that's held in place nice and firmly. Whoops, she says. There we go. Okay, so that's held in place on the middle. So then I'm going to work back out to one of the edges, so we'll come this way, so we'll come through that bead. And you just use your judgment a little bit, work out which is the best bead to come through to get yourself in the right place to make a nice secure fastening. So come up through your ring and through the bead underneath, and up through the ring, and I'll go through this bead this way. Oops. Now this particular bracelet is using silver lined beads, so they're a little bit more robust. If you were using frosted beads or matte beads, they can be a little bit more fragile, so just take your time and don't force your needle through a bead where it doesn't want to go. So just pull that tight and through that one. Go through that one there. Okay, there we go. That's through the bead, through the ring, and then we'll come through here, and we're just going to work across again. And so now obviously this thread showing a bit more than perhaps you would think was ideal, but this is actually going to be on the inside of the bracelet next to your wrist when it's worn. So if I turn it over, you'll see that the join on this side is invisible. So we'll just attach this to this end. Oops. If you can't get through the ring and the bead in one go, and do it in two, it really doesn't matter. Just make sure that you don't get your thread caught anywhere, because you don't want to be left with a big loop of thread that you've got to cut down and sew in, because that can be quite awkward. Okay, so when you're happy that it's nice and secure like that, then you can just work away from the clasp. Just come through a couple of beads here, and we'll come this way, and we'll go up and we'll go back on ourselves, so back down through, and off in this direction here, and then we'll cut that in there, and then we'll take the keeper bead off here, And I'll just finish off this end. So again, just work through a few beads. And again, trim that tail. Okay, and we'll do the same thing on this other end of the bracelet, making sure that we sew that to the right side, because if we sew it underneath, then that's not going to be quite so attractive. So if you put your first couple of stitches in with the clasp together, it's a little bit fiddly to do, but once you've got that clasp orientated in the correct direction, you'll be able to take it out and then make sure it's stitched down nice and securely, and that will give you your rainbow band bracelet. We hope you enjoy. Let us know how you get on.